Yesterday we were covering more the overview of where attention is placed within Western psychology, and we heard about the idea of multitasking, of the different ideas, how attention is happening. But particularly we also were hearing then afterwards in the afternoon Alan's presentation about the general place of attention in the Buddhist framework. And I'm very honored to announce today the presentation of Anne Treisman. She's a professor at Princeton University, at the Department of Psychology, and she is considered to be the most eminent and the grand dame of attention research. She has been doing research in the West probably the longest of everybody that we are at least aware of, and has been accordingly awarded many honors and many prizes for her outstanding research. And we're going to be looking into what is actually attention. Yesterday we were framing it, and today we're going to be looking at it from different angles. And one of the topics that already came up in yesterday's discussion was the binding problem. And
binding problem.
Binding.
Would you like to explain that?
I'll explain it later.
Yes. She will be explaining, and I was just reaching a bit out to what we're going to be hearing today. So, Anne, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I'm greatly honoured to be one of the presenters at this wonderful occasion and to have the chance to talk to Your Holiness. I hope I'll manage to make my talk intelligible and interesting to you. And I should say from the start that it's a talk from an outsider. I'm not familiar with, I'm not very familiar anyway, with much of Buddhist theories. I'll try to present to you the Western psychology approach. I'm certainly one who's eager to learn more about the Buddhist approach. So I'm interested in exploring the possible interactions between Buddhist accounts of attention based on meditation and introspection and Western psychological accounts based on experiments and observation from the outside of behavior and of the brain. Can we talk to each other, or are the findings, as it were, in different languages? Do they raise the so-called hard philosophical problems of relating brain and mind? Could there be findings in the Western approach which are incompatible with Buddhism? And similarly, could there be findings in Western theories that conflict with what the Buddhists claim? I'm not sure that there could be such conflicts, because the questions and methods, I think, are different. We use the third person rather than the first person, as Alan described yesterday. But I think that raises a problem not so much in the sense that Alan was arguing. As he said, psychologists very much use the first person. We rely on our subjects to report what they are experiencing. But I think we use these reports differently from the way they're used in Buddhist psychology. We use them as data to be explained and interpreted rather than as factual reports. Okay? So one way of linking the two is to look for neural or behavioral correlates of what meditators report experiencing. Another bridge might be to explore how long-term experience affects the kinds of attention tasks that we study in the West. And we have collected some preliminary data on that question. These are important methods for psychologists, I think. I'd also be very interested to know what Buddhist psychology, what Buddhist psychology hopes to get from us. I think that's an important question. One important difference, I think, is that the kinds of mechanisms that psychologists hypothesize are often not directly available to us to think about. We can't introspect them. So we infer them to make sense of observations of behavior rather than looking inward directly to access them. The findings I'll describe first on focused attention, I think, will illustrate this difference. So, coming back to attention, it's a good topic to explore, I think, because it's at the heart of meditation. Studies of attention also raise some big questions which are relevant both to Buddhist psychology and to Western psychology. The first one that I want to talk about is what are the effects of different modes of attention? Secondly, what kind...
What do you mean by modes of attention?
I'll explain, yes. What kinds of things can we become aware of and what kinds of things remain inaccessible to our minds and why? So I'm going to talk both about attention and about consciousness and try and give examples of some research in each field. First, to outline the methods that we use. Psychologists study attention by using tasks that seem to capture some essentials of the everyday examples, but put them in a controlled setting where we can keep control of the different variables. So we measure the latencies of response, how fast people can do things, and the kinds of errors that they make, and try to work out what the underlying mental processes might be. So we also look at activation in different areas of the brain, and we study the changes in performance that patients with damage in particular areas will show.
Never.
What we're really thrashing through here is just the technical terminology and invite you into this, because none of us feel, I think, that there's a direct equivalence between the Sanskrit term manasikara or yidachala in Tibetan. It's not quite a direct match with attention. Overlap, but at least His Holiness and I are not persuaded it's equivalent. There's voluntary attention, in which you have this notion of yearning or aspiration that comes in, but not all attention is voluntary. Right. But there's this very common term, samadhi, and samadhi does not always mean a high level of focus attention. It's simply a mental factor. I can explain very easily. So when speaking of shamatha, we're speaking of really developing very enhanced states of very focused, sustained, vivid attention. We're not talking about that, but there's simply the mental factor that we already have. And so what shamatha is, this whole matrix of practices of shamatha, is taking a faculty you already have, let's call it samadhi, and let's say this is attention, and it's developing it to higher and higher levels. It's enhancing, refining it, developing it. But we already have samadhi. In the Buddhist psychology, we already have a samadhi. It's not something you get later. It's something you may or may not develop. And so my own feeling is there's a very focus.
Samadhi.
Samadhi really just means focused attention. But all attention is focused in a manner of speaking. I think we should probably get back to Anne as the time is going.
I hope that some of this will become clearer as I give examples. I'm not surprised that it raises problems, because people in the West argue for many, many hours over what the meaning of attention is. And I don't think it's a single thing. I don't think it's one faculty. But you will see how I am using it by the experiments that I describe. Okay. So different modes of attention. I said I would explain modes. This is ways of deploying attention, whether we're going to spread it broadly, distribute it across a whole scene, try and take in everything that's in front of us, or do we focus narrowly onto one thing, like my computer here? And what effects does that have on what we perceive? Do we get different information when attention is spread broadly and when it is narrowly focused? Okay. And we can also compare attention when it's directed outward to things in the world and when it's directed inward to ideas, mental calculations, thoughts, and so on. Then the second part of the talk will be on, as I said, on consciousness, explicit awareness, which means we have available to us to introspect the information that we're talking about, but we also we also have much knowledge that seems to be implicit, to which we do not have access. One of the questions would be how far you can get access to this implicit information through meditation. And we can ask, can unconscious stimuli affect our behavior? Finally, I was going to describe some experiments that we did on experienced meditators to see how their attention is changed by that experience. Okay. Here is an outline of my talk. So I'll start off by describing how different modes of attention, whether it's broadly spread or narrowly focused, affect what becomes consciously available to us. I'll then go on and talk about explicit awareness or implicit knowledge, that's consciousness. Does attention affect only what we can experience with knowledge, or can unconscious stimuli also affect our behavior? And then, as I said, I'll describe some experiments on the effects of meditation on attention, and finally come back to some open questions, which I hope we can discuss. So, modes of attention, ways of directing attention. First, focused attention. This is a narrow focus. It's what people in the West usually mean by attention, I think. When you're attending to something, you're narrowing down and looking exclusively at that or listening to it. So it's like a spotlight focused on one object. I've been interested in what kinds of information we get. So with focused attention, we certainly get more detail. We can also exclude interference from irrelevant material. This is one important function, I think, of focused attention. And the third one, I think, is less obvious because it's not available to introspection. So this is one where I have done some research, and I'd like just to describe it to you and explain it to you. When we look around the world, we experience integrated objects, whole objects with all their properties, shape, color, orientation, size, distance, and so on. So we might see a red car moving down the hill, and we get the whole thing as a single unified experience. But both behavioral and neural evidence suggests that different visual properties, like shape, size, color, motion, and so on, actually are analyzed separately in the brain. Neuroscientists have found different populations of neurons in the brain, different cells in the brain that respond in a specialized way to different types of change, like something moving, something color, in different areas of the brain. We can also see it in patients with brain damage that's localized in different areas. They may selectively lose the ability to see motion, for example. So one patient was unable to see motion. He'd just see a series of still photographs. If he were looking at a car driving along, he'd see it here, then here, then here. Water being poured from a teapot looked like icicles hanging down. Another patient, for example, might lose the ability to see color, and the world would simply be in black and gray and white. And the areas that are damaged are in different parts of the brain. So it seems as if the visual system represents each of these different properties at least partly independently of the others. So it seems as if the brain takes the stimulus apart in a fragmented, distributed form. So this is what I just said. We can also attend selectively to particular properties, so I can look around at the different colors in the room, or whether anyone is moving, and so on. So again, that suggests independent processing. So this raises the binding problem. How do we recombine these properties to make an integrated object, which is what we experience? Consciousness is full of unitary, integrated objects. How come, given that the brain has separated out all the different properties, how do we put them together again? That's known as the binding problem.
So His Holiness was saying that there's a parallel problem raised in the Buddhist epistemological discourse about how perceptions represent the sense data when it perceives objects. And there were 3 different positions taken. And the position that has been favored is really seen as, although the world that is experienced is that of multiplicity, but the actual experience is a unity.
Yes, that's exactly the binding problem. How do we reach that unity, I think? So this is something that I have been doing research on. And I made a very simple suggestion, which was that we just we use focused attention, attend to each object in turn, and then we can put together, combine the features that are currently in the focus of attention. Okay, now this is not something that you can introspect. It happens below the level of consciousness.
So another distinction that is made in Buddhist epistemology is the way in which sensory perceptions engage with object, and where thoughts mediated through concepts engage. Thoughts are much more selective. They can just pick one property.
That's right, yes. This is like what I called attending selectively to the color or to the motion. So,
whereas the sensory perceptions are thought to be much more direct and unmediated through concepts.
Then you wouldn't be using attention. You would just passively allow information to come in.
So so from the Buddhist point of view, a very important distinction is made, fundamental distinction is drawn between kind of thoughts or mental level cognition, which are mediated through concepts and language on the one hand, and bare sensory experiences. And it seems that in the Western epistemological and psychological model, that fundamental distinction doesn't seem to have been made.
Oh, I think it is.
You think?
Yes, I mean, we talk very much about top-down effects. Top-down means from high up on the sensory input, and how perception comes from the interaction of the two. So I think this is very much in our tradition as well. So it's interesting.
So one can make distinctions on the basis of the brain correspondence as well, correlations?
Yes. So early visual areas would mainly respond to the sensory, and then you can see the frontal cortex sending messages down.
Tata degi omare the namje pije kuzuti dan moshadana ji chebena an wangshelia bet shibuja rakba ngasane mado sham dige chama tokpokon du omare pije.
It's only a little bit translate, because there's this very kind of primitive level of attention that is called we call mental engagement, manasikara, but it's a very primitive level. There are higher levels, much more engaged and cognitive levels of attention, where we're going more into the realm of samadhi and then sustained with mindfulness. His Holiness was commenting for this very primitive level of attention and the initial engagement of the mind with an object. This occurs both in perceptual or non-conceptual and conceptual modes of cognition, so it's common to both. But introspectively, one does draw a distinction that addresses the issue of binding in terms of our direct perceptual, which is to say non-conceptual apprehension of the world. We're just getting a multiplicity of qualia,
Right.
of impressions coming
Yeah.
in that just by straight perception itself do not bind themselves into
Right.
objects that
I'll
have
show you this.
qualities.
Yes.
This is from the Buddha side.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm looking here, and I'm not just seeing a pattern of appearances,
Right.
but I'm seeing a professor and so forth.
Right.
And so what configures the sensory appearances, the qualia, into objects is the configuration, the conditioning by concept, drawing from memory and so forth. This congeals the appearances into an object that has qualities.
Yes.
And so this topic is not left out
No.
on the Buddha side, and I think it's not entirely inaccessible to introspection either. But now what are the brain correlates? Well, for that, then we Buddhists, then we're quiet.
Yes.
And we're listening to the brain scientists, what you have to say.
Okay. So if this suggestion is correct, then one prediction is that we should make errors. We should put the different features together in the wrong combinations when attention is overloaded or when it's diverted to other things. So I'll see if I can demonstrate that. What we did was we showed subjects displays like this, 2 black digits and 3 colored letters in between. And we told them they must get the digits correct. They must tell us, for example, 7 and 4 were at each end. And then also tell us what colored letters they saw. Okay, so they're spreading attention, which means, according to my theory, they might have trouble binding the colors and the shapes. And that's, in fact, what we found. So let me just show you an example. I will flash briefly another string like this, and then follow it with what we call a mask, which interrupts perception of that. It's a lot of colored lines. You should get the digits correct, the 2 digits on each end, and also tell me what colored letters you saw. Okay, ready?
대중을 때 줘봐. 다들 들으셔. 안경이 버룰이야. 이게 숨체. 이게 숨그 천도 담으라체. 아니 디버룰이야. 다 바로도 준 얘기. 나빠대.
So shall I show that again? Or
Very nice to have you.
okay, ready?
Holiness? 고랑이야.
그게
양겸.
Now, the digits were 3 and 7. I hope you got those right.
Yeah.
And then here are the colored letters. Now, when I normally show this to an audience, usually 1/3 of them get an illusory conjunction. That is, they say, I saw a red O or a green T. And I was subject to this. I was testing my theory many years ago, and I said, oh, it doesn't work, I can see everything perfectly. And my research assistant was laughing because she said, I'm making many, many of those binding errors. This, I think, suggests that
So this is really measuring your ability to conceptually identify, not simply conceptually identify colors and letters in it. So you're getting a visual impression, but also then
yeah, you have to go down and get the letters.
the brevity with which you can conceptually ascertain.
Right.
원시 테마가 내버린 거로 봐.
So it does seem as if...
제시 된 것도 가. 유신도 투나 로이 뉴버디 당그 매윈자. 원시 내버린 통마로. 유대에서 랭도 충분했나? 원시 내버린 자유네. 원시 제시 된 거로 봐. 테마 있나? 원시 테마.
It seems as if binding is a real problem for the brain. I mean, it is something that the brain has to solve in order to see the world correctly.
Solins was wondering whether it is a function of how fast the person's thought process is, or whether it is how fast the actual perceptual process is.
Right.
So what would be your take on this?
I'm not sure I would distinguish. I think there's a continuum of different stages, and where you make the conceptual start and the sensory stop is not always clear.
So Solins was wondering whether he could ask a question.
Of course.
Is there a difference? Would you see a difference, within an individual due to age? Say, for example, is exposed to this experiment 10 years before and has performed it, and then after 10 years, so will the age make a difference?
I haven't found age differences. I haven't looked specifically for it. Children show these, so do adults, and I don't think I'm showing more as I get older. I think I'm the same age as Your Holiness. So other things change with age, but...
So the reason why His Holiness asked that question is that if there is a difference due to age, then it's very much related to the sensory process.
Yeah.
Because as you get older, the sensory processes weaken.
Yes, they do, and in many ways, but I don't think this is one of them.
But if it is a level of mental thought level, then even when you are older, so long as you have trained your mind, you can still retain it quite sharp.
That's right, which is a comfort.
Comfort that it stems to the others. His Holiness was saying for the oldies.
So we also get more evidence from Balint's patients. Now, Balint's patients are very unfortunate people, but luckily very rare. It doesn't often happen. They have damage to both parietal lobes, so both lobes here and here. And we studied one of these patients. He had a stroke on one side and then a subsequent stroke on the other side, almost symmetrical. They are unable to localize objects, so they don't know where things are at all. If you ask them, is an X at the top or bottom of the screen, left or right, they have no idea. And they're also unable to shift attention around. They can't move attention. So they should have a lot of trouble with binding, was my prediction, and our patient did. So we would show him simple displays like this, just 2 colored letters, and ask him what he saw, and we could leave it up for 10 seconds, not quickly. And he would be almost as likely to say he saw a green X as that he saw a green O. Really, he had big problems with binding. So it seems that seeing integrated objects with their features bound in the correct combinations is an important function for focused attention. This patient had lost the ability to focus attention, and he saw many illusory conjunctions. I think the binding problem does not apply only to perception. Your Holiness was asking about, is it a conceptual problem? And I think it is, although I haven't studied it so much. The perceptual form is the one that's easiest to do experiments with, but I think it's a much more general issue. In order to think at all, we need to bring together different concepts to form an integrated idea. And I think attention is involved in creating and maintaining this complex web of ideas, keeping a higher order structure in mind and in memory while we work on it. In fact, one of the most common kinds of memory errors, of mistakes that we make in memory, consists of losing the correct associations between features and ideas. So this is just a summary of what I've been saying. I like to think of perception as a kind of externally guided hallucination. So we get some information in a very discrete form. It's much less like photography than we would think. And we create an experience from that. So we see some red, we see an X, and we put them together with the right amount of red to fill the X. So let's move on now to distributed or global attention. That's spread over a lot of different objects in the world. What effect does that have on perception? It'll allow you to see the global shape. For example, you can here see the T and the H, as well as the S and the C. So with distributed attention, you see the large letters. With focused attention, you see the small ones. It will allow you to see that these dots are homogeneous, so you can take them all in. They're all green, except one is red now. It also, I think, gives you the gist of a scene. For example, you can, with a brief flash, you can see that there's a beach there or a shopping center. So, for example, if I show you that briefly, you probably all saw a mountain scene. Here you saw a kitchen. And this puzzled me a little because how can we do this if we have to bind the features one by one? We don't see each object coming up successively as we move attention around. Yet the pictures in natural scenes are much more complex than a single red X and green S and so on. But they seem to be identified much faster when I just flash the pictures up. A possible solution was that people might be responding simply to the presence of features without binding them together into objects. And we decided to test this by seeing what people actually knew when they'd seen some flashed pictures. What could they tell us? So we used the task of asking people, is there an animal present in the scene? So if I show you this one, you'll say, yes, there's an animal. I'd like you to look for any animal, including bird, fish, insect, and so on, in the following sequence. If I can get this to work. Okay. Ready? Was there an animal? Anybody see an animal? Here, I'll show you them slowly. There. So that was what you saw very quickly. In fact, people can do it. About 80% of the time they see the animal correctly. However, what we did was try to find out how much they had seen, how much they knew. And we asked them, which was the animal? What was it? Was it a bear or a snake or a butterfly? And they usually knew the general category, but they didn't know, they couldn't tell a bear from a cow, for example. And also they didn't know where in the picture it was. So left, right, or center, they didn't know. So it seems as if that's what we would expect, I think, if all the information they had was in the form of unbound features, just features coming in. Yeah.